Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we've been discussing overall the concept of media, the ways that we interact with it, the ways that it manipulates our behavior, the ways that we give it control over our behaviors. We've been discussing a lot of different topics. In the last video, we delved into something called values clarification, which is a bit of a complicated, complex, and nuanced topic. It has to do with a type of guided and directed educational style. We were discussing this in the context of the evolution of American schooling and the public education system specifically. Over the years, in the early part of the 20th century, a man named John Dewey really spearheaded a movement towards the socialization of children, as opposed to using a system where the individual student was given the tools to think and reason critically about the world. As we moved into the middle part of the 20th century, things moved more towards a emphasis on the social environment and the social learning, and that was where values clarification really started to take hold, where a teacher was not so much a person who presented information for students to use the critical thinking tools that they were developing, and became more of a guide towards a directed or approved outcome or correct response towards understanding various sets of information in the school system. We ended up with some personal information and sort of some like a moral call to steel our minds and really work hard to be able to develop our thinking capacities individually. We're going to pick up back where that left off, and so let's just dive right in. Okay, so at the end of the last video, we had some information about values clarification, and we kind of got into this area of like a woke or social justice ideology and worldview. So we're going to pick up with a little bit more of that material. And the question is like, where do values clarification and the idea of wokeness actually connect to one another? If we think about this, we can ask ourselves things like, what do these two things have in common? One, in values clarification, is a way to teach children about decision making in real world scenarios, while the other, in the woke ideology, is an ideological framework that adheres to specific political and social stances on a very wide variety of issues. Now, on the surface, it's not necessarily apparent that they have any real connection to one another. However, if we look at what's being done at like the psychological or even philosophical levels of both, these things become a little bit more interesting. Both of these concepts or topics in values clarification and a woke ideology are highly driven by or entirely based upon the emotionally affected state of the people doing any thinking or making choices or operating within society, which is an intricate series of choices in and of itself. This would be a good place to explore for connectivity, but these two things also carry with them a certain level or degree of moral judgment. And it's in this moral judgment that we will likely find our most solid connection to place our footing on when we're thinking about these two things. When a person is operating under any moral standard, they will inherently assign moral value to behaviors or choices, various people or groups, and ways of viewing the world. These values will be clarified to the world by their actions and behaviors in any activity during your daily life. So it stands to reason then that wokeness could be thought of as an outward expression of the values that a person who has adopted these specific ideological frameworks holds within their thinking. It's in this way that we find our connection to the idea of values clarification, or a guided and directed process of thinking. So we found the connection, now what of it? I mean, the goal of this whole exercise channel, all of this stuff we're doing, is to endeavor to learn and to seek truth, and how to do that in the most effective ways possible. So with that in mind, let's look at what it means to base any amount of our thinking out of an emotionally affected state. Our emotions are vitally important to our daily life. They serve many profound purposes which allow us to connect to reality in very deep ways. Positive emotional responses to the world around us, such as happiness and joy and affection, can be very good indicators that we have basic necessities like safety, love, and peace in our lives. Likewise, emotions that cause anger or fear are indicators to us that we're experiencing some potential harm, or maybe in danger and need to take action to protect ourselves. A person's capacity for empathy is directly linked to their ability to understand emotions and to effectively think about what other people deal with on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis. This is crucial to the stability and functioning of any society, which means that our emotions are incredibly valuable when it comes to discerning truth. However, this does present potential problems when it comes to discerning truth with any significant degree of accuracy. And this is where we will need to address the concept of logical fallacies and heuristic thinking models. Now, I don't intend to spend a great deal of time on these two topics just yet, but I do wish to introduce them here and get us starting to think about them as obstacles which stand in our way when it comes to the discerning of truth. I would recommend that if you'd like a detailed discussion, and a rigorous one at that, on fallacies and heuristics, visit the website that I have included in the description box below this video. It is a brilliantly crafted Substack page. I've mentioned it a few times in my other videos. It's called the Frontisterium, and I know that you'll get a lot of really deep and valuable information by reading the essays within that resource. When we are engaging with media, especially the kind that is pushed at the most mainstream levels, we're going to be bombarded with fallacious thinking. And I really do think it's wise that we understand that we must be on the hunt for these kinds of errors at all times. So, what is a fallacy? A fallacy is to be understood as any error in logical thinking processes. And these things, fallacious thinking, exists in a broad range of varieties which span every possible area of human cognition. Fallacies are incredibly deceptive, and we often are employing them or will be using them in our own thinking, many times subconsciously. For this discussion, we'll be concerned with what's known as the appeal to emotion fallacy. This is when we look to our emotional state to provide proof as to the invalidity or validity of our thinking processes. Essentially, we can think of this in terms of, if something feels good, then it must be good. And if that's true, then the inverse applies, in that if something feels bad, then it must be bad. Notice that there's an equation of the idea of a feeling and the actual state of things. It's easy to see that this is not a sound foundation upon which to attempt to process our various experiences, let alone form an entire worldview. How many times have you been uncomfortable going into a situation only to discover that you grew and flourished by facing the painful challenge that was in front of you? What if you had given up on that learning experience simply because of your initial emotional response to what was lying ahead? That's a really basic example, but I do think it's good to think about these kinds of things. And there are many deep drivers for why we fall into the emotional appeal fallacy. In my own personal experience, I have a deep subconscious drive to avoid pain. Any kind of pain, whether it be physical, emotional, spiritual, or intellectual. And I'll often make choices many times without thinking deeply about why, and that will result in me feeling good at the outcome, but it doesn't necessarily result in any growth or any type of honesty. This is not uncommon, and it's what I wish to point to with regard to the connection between what we talked about earlier in values clarification training and wokeness. What I see so often in people who have adopted such an ideology or worldview is that they desperately want good things for everyone. Good outcomes, good, social situations for people. They want equality, everything to be right in the world. Now, this on the surface is quite a noble thing to wish, and I'm in no way trying to diminish anyone's compassion or their desire for altruism. However, what I often see in people is that they appeal to their emotional state or any type of emotional reaction, whether it's conscious or subconscious, regarding nearly every area of their life, which then blinds them to potential options of how to move next and to make the best, most logical, truth-oriented choices. Unfortunately, when a person is thinking in these ways, they become incredibly vulnerable to manipulation and programming from entities that wish to steer us in a direction that goes against our own best interests. They can easily prey on emotionally dysregulated people and hijack what would otherwise be a logical, systematic thought process, thus ensuring that the outcome is only what was designed by the entity that is seeking control. So we've only just scratched the surface on fallacious thinking, and we just touched on an emotional appeal fallacy, and there is a lot to go into in this topic. We will get to a lot of it as we develop the channel a little bit more and as we go into more discussion. But for now, I wanted to present the topic of fallacies, present the idea of heuristics, and just get us thinking in terms of seeing connections between values clarification and what is commonly referred to as the woke ideology. It could be thought of as like an ultra-progressive or social justice ideology. And this isn't to tear down any political opinions or feelings, but it's more to get us thinking about the ways in which we have been programmed to think about the world. Oftentimes we move without really diving deep into why or how it is we get to where we're going. And I want us to start thinking about the ways that we allow ourselves to be guided and directed by appealing to our emotions and giving up control over our own individual thinking capacities. I'm going to leave it there for now, and we'll pick up with a lot more of this kind of material moving forward. But as we think and reason throughout the week, try to find ways and areas that you appeal to emotion or allow your emotions to run ahead of your logical thinking capacities, and see if when you're dealing with media, whether it's social media or news or anything like that, if you find yourself being swayed one way or the other simply by reading or seeing something that plays on your emotions. Could these things be there on purpose? Could they have been placed and manipulated in certain ways that are meant to get a rise out of your emotions? Do you think I'm overblowing this? I think it's important. So until the next time, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you take care of one another. I hope you check in on your family and loved ones, and stay diligent and vigilant with your minds on guard.